Welcome to this video. We're going to be taking a look at the book of Daniel, and particularly the chapters that describe these prophecies of the end from Daniel's perspective. And we're definitely going to be taking a Christian approach, but I'm going to try to be as subjective as I can be and hold off from making any conclusions until I present the evidence. So first, in chapters 2 and 7, we have these visions of the kingdoms that are to come from the perspective of where Daniel finds himself, which is under the service of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And the four kingdoms are, of course, Babylon first, but Babylon will be overtaken by a lesser kingdom of lesser splendor, Media Persia, and they will be conquered by a powerful kingdom that will take over the world, basically. And that's the Greek kingdom that is led by Alexander the Great through the Macedonian people. And they will spread Greek influence across the entire world, so they are very powerful. And then the fourth kingdom will be the Empire of Rome, and that is going to be the kingdom that Daniel spends the most time discussing, even though it's never mentioned by name. So, as we mentioned, this fourth kingdom becomes very important in the prophecy. It is the only kingdom that is never named in the entire book of Daniel. It is a kingdom that is inherently divided. So if we look in chapter 2, verse 41, it specifically says that this is a divided kingdom. It is something that is inherent to it, not something that takes place within the time of the prophecy. It is what it is. It is a divided kingdom already. And we know this, if this is the Roman Empire, we know that it is birthed from civil war. As soon as Julius Caesar passes away, civil war breaks out, and this is what really gives the character of the Roman Empire. It is the strongest will rule. It is a pluralistic society, so on top of the division that is internal to its war conflict, it is different people coming together that forms Rome. So, although it is strong and cohesive in one way, it is also weak because it lends itself to provincial conflicts, including rebellion. Particularly, in here we can discuss the Jewish rebellions that are going to be central to Daniel's prophecies. So the claim that it must divide before the end is completely wrong. If anyone says, "Oh, this is something that has to take place," that's incorrect. It is iron and clay. It is already inherently divided in its very characteristics, its very nature. The fourth kingdom also has, in chapter 2, 10 toes. Now, obviously, feet have 10 toes. Like, this is something that is obvious, but it's something that is mentioned. Why would it need to be mentioned? The toes do represent something, and we see this come back in chapter 7 when the beasts are described. This fourth beast, which is the kingdom of Rome, is described as having 10 horns. And then the angel Gabriel explains that these are kings, 10 kings. And that means that we're looking at the Caesars, right? So Daniel wants us as the reader to understand that there is a count of kings for this prophecy uh, at the fourth kingdom. This doesn't happen with the other kingdoms. It only happens at the fourth kingdom. And this gives us an exact timeline that Daniel wants us to follow. We can't ignore it. So if we start counting with Julius Caesar, we start counting all the Caesars, we end up the 10th Caesar being Vespasian. Vespasian is the king that will topple three other competing emperors during this time period, that in 69 AD, after the death of Nero, there's four emperors that all claim to be emperors, and Vespasian is the one that comes up on top. This becomes important later on. So he rules from 69 to 79 AD. Some pretty important stuff happened during this time too. So it all pertains to this prophecy, as we shall see. So the fourth kingdom comes to an end, and actually all the kingdoms come to an end with this rock. It is mentioned first in chapter 2, and it is a rock that really contrasts to the statue that's presented, right? The statue is made out of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay, some precious elements, and it is shaped, whereas this rock is just carved, and it's not carved by human hands. So it is a very different object. So it is intending to differentiate itself from those kingdoms. It is not human made, and it is not like the kingdoms. It is not made through human effort or power, which we'll see again in chapter 8. And this rock gets thrown at the statue. A good question is who throws it, right? So if it's human carved, it makes sense that the aggression, the violence comes through human hands. But this is exactly what this is rejecting. This is not human carved. The throwing of it is also not human. So it is most likely implied that God is the one that throws it to destroy, to topple the statue. It does hit the feet first, Rome. So wherever this rock is found, it's going to be found chronologically during the time of Rome, and it will conquer Rome. But this has an impact that it destroys the entire statue. All the kingdoms are toppled as a consequence of throwing this rock. And it's not just this fourth kingdom, it is all the kingdoms. So if anyone says, oh, well, the fourth kingdom has to be defeated and utterly destroyed by another kingdom, that's actually incorrect. The clear teaching here is that all the kingdoms are toppled by the actions of God on this rock. And as a consequence, the kingdoms are turned to dust, blown away by the wind. And the rock is also shown to become like a mountain. Its importance grows and grows and grows, and it covers the whole earth. And it is established forever. It is indestructible. Now, a point that is often made here is that forever may not mean forever. It may just mean a very long time. But the emphasis here, it is both forever and indestructible in 244. So there's an emphasis that suggests that this should be an eternal established kingdom that will not pass away. And this also corresponds with the promises to David. It corresponds to a lot of things that we see in the Bible, that God is promising something that will be eternal. And chapter 7, the beasts are sequentially described as monstrous beings. The fourth beast has 10 horns, and there's a moment in which one of these horns, the smallest one, a little horn, becomes larger and takes over and knocks down 3 other horns. It comes from the others. This is not an 11th horn. It is among the others already, as we can see in chapter 7, verse 8. And this actually is reflecting very precise timing, again, for Vespasian's rule. Because after Nero dies, as we mentioned earlier, a mini civil war erupts with 4 claimants to the throne to be emperor. And Vespasian is the one that emerges victorious of these. This is also known as the year of 4 emperors historically. This is a very precise moment in history, right? So you can see here how Daniel 7:8 describes it. I'll read it really quick. While I was thinking about the horns, that before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. So this horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. It is also during this exact timing that Daniel switches to talk about the beginning of this eternal kingdom as the Ancient of Days sits on his throne. It is an inauguration scene in heaven that shows that this moment, whatever is happening here, this boastful speaking of this little horn, will launch the eternal kingdom. This is the moment that starts the new covenant for Christians, and as we see how Matthew interprets this, how Jesus interprets this. Um, but importantly, the beast, their power persists and they continue for some time in chapter 7. As we'll see soon, this some time actually has a precise measure as well. And also in chapter 7, we get this vision of the Son of Man. Now, some people will discount this because Son of Man is just a term that means um, a human being. In most references, right across Daniel, he's referred to as Son of Man. We see this in other prophetic passages as well. However, in this case, this is something different. In chapter 7, verses 13 through 14, we see that before Daniel, he sees a vision of someone like a son of man. This is not the son of man. He's not somebody who is literally son of man, but is someone that is like a son of man. So he appears human. But this human appearing entity comes with the clouds of heaven. This is a reference that is only used for Yahweh, for God in the Old Testament. This human or like human person approaches the Ancient of Days directly. He's led into his presence. And God gives this Son of Man authority, glory, and sovereign power. Now, this is important because glory is something God specifically says he will never share with anyone. But here, glory is given over to the Son of Man. And what happens as a consequence? All nations and peoples in all languages worship the Son of Man. How can this be a positive thing, right? Is this idolatry? It's obviously suggesting that it would not be idolatrous to worship the Son of Man because the Son of Man comes in the clouds of heaven, is in the presence of the Ancient of Days, is given all authority, all power. He is to be worshipped, and his dominion is everlasting. It is eternal. He has a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Again, this emphasis that we saw already in chapter 2, again here repeated to emphasize it, and in the repetition being emphasized that it is eternal, will not pass away, will not be destroyed. So this is the same entity. This is the kingdom that was referred to in chapter 2. So this Son of Man is the rock. This is the rock, and it is the rock that is carved not by human men, comes from the Ancient of Days, is empowered by, authorized by the Ancient of Days, and is given all power over all kingdoms. So one last word about chapter 7 before moving on. In chapter 2, we see that the kingdoms are destroyed, and God sets up this different kingdom that is not made of human hands, whose rule will be eternal. Chapter 7 ends a little bit different. It gives a lot more detail about what's going to happen in this final kingdom before the Son of Man, as we saw earlier. And so we see that there is a war caused by Vespasian. There has to be a war. And Vespasian will change times and laws. Whatever it is that Vespasian is going to do is going to radically change how the people of God understand their laws and their own festivities and celebrations, their times. And this, of course, just to give you a preview, this is going to be the case because Vespasian will destroy the temple in Jerusalem, and that is going to drastically change all these things for Israelites. And after this, um, there's going to be a time of persecution, and I mentioned this earlier. It was said that this would last for some time, and now we know what that some time is. It is a time, times, and half a time. So this is very ambiguous. It could mean anything. You have any kind of interpretations. I am here providing my own interpretation. That time each time is 100 years. And I can justify it because within Daniel, there's another reference that suggests time that is slightly different, and I'll talk about this in just a minute. But this means that it will be a time frame of 350 years of persecution after the Messiah is revealed. So this persecution um, will last until this power of the kingdom is handed over to the holy ones. And we see that this is a handing over of this kingdom. But whatever power this kingdom possesses, even as it is persecuting the holy ones, that power is going to be given over to the holy ones. God will destroy its power, take it away, and give it over to the holy ones. This, of course, from a Christian perspective, sounds very much like God is going to give Rome to the church. In chapter 8, we get another vision of the kingdoms. It is slightly different. Now we have a more animalistic vision. So Persia, Media is described as a two-horned ram. Makes sense because there's two different kingdoms that kind of merged. The goat is completely overpowered by, I'm sorry, the two-horned ram is completely overpowered by a goat, which Daniel tells us is Greece. And then, of course, we know what that event is Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king, who expands Greek influence across the ancient world. Now, it specifically says that Greece is going to be divided into four kingdoms. And these four kingdoms are weaker, right? So we also get a reference to the rebellion. So there's going to be a civil war between these four kingdoms. And at the end of their time, Daniel has this vision of this master of intrigue that rises. It is described as a horn that is detached from any animal body. It's just a horn, and it is able to overtake the previous powers. So this is the Caesars, right? This is Rome, and it is said that it'll cause terrible devastation. And here we get a very specific passage because in the original vision of the animals, you see that this happens because of rebellion. So this devastation takes place because of rebellion. The rebellion in this case is the rebellion of the people of God. They rebel against Rome. And that will lead to the end of sacrifices. So the or the Jewish rebellion will lead to the end of sacrifices. Daniel here also talks about this in terms of the desolation, an event that creates desolation. He takes a stand against the Prince of Princes. Who is he? The Caesar. Caesar is going to take a stand against the Prince of Princes. That is, Rome will kill the Prince of Princes, as we'll see in just a second. And then this king, this Caesar, this horn, will be destroyed. But again, Daniel emphasizes that this destruction will come about not by human power. So it isn't that there is another kingdom of earth that will topple this kingdom. God is going to do something to bring this kingdom to an end. So, chapter 9 of Daniel gives us a lot more insights, in particular, insights into the timing of everything that's taking place towards the end of Daniel's prophecies. And this is tied to the Messiah. So the angel Gabriel tells Daniel that 77s are decreed between the time of the word going out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the arrival of the anointed one, which is the Messiah. This is in verse 925, the first part of that verse. That's a whole 490 years expected between the time that this word goes out to finalize the city and restore the people until the arrival of the Messiah. Um, this is actually something that we see directly in the book of Ezra. So in Ezra, in chapter 7, we get an explicit reference to this final decree that is about restoring the temple and the people of Jerusalem. Ezra is not just given this decree, but is given a lot of gold to supply and staff the temple. And this is something that allows Ezra to do something that had been missing, which is bring the people of Israel into the city of Jerusalem and consecrate them, purify them for the task of awaiting for the Messiah, which is exactly what this prophecy is saying begins the ticking of the time frame for its fulfillment. So Ezra has the funds to do the finishing touches of the temple, has the fund to supply and staff the temple, um, and this brings in the people that will ultimately finalize the restoration of the whole city, including the walls that we read about in Nehemiah. And this timing is very important because if you count from 458 BC, when Ezra returns to Jerusalem with this word from Persia, we get um, exactly to 32 AD when we add 490 years. And that is obviously one of the leading dates for when we say that Jesus was crucified. And it is at this crucifixion that Jesus is crowned the King of the Jews. Now, ironically, obviously, it's a mockery, but Christians confess that this is the entire world confessing that Jesus is King. Um, the inscription, right, is written in Hebrew, in Greek, and in Latin, symbolizing the acceptance of his kingdom by the power of the world at the time, the Roman Empire, by the people of the world, the Greek being the lingua franca, and by the Jewish people themselves, the Hebrew. This happens exactly 490 years after Ezra sets this timing, fulfilling the scripture. We also get this reference to 62 sevens and 7 sevens, which is a total of 483 years, just 7 years short of the arrival of the Messiah. And I argue that that is indicating the word for the Messiah, the actual prophetic word that John the Baptist issues concerning the imminent arrival of the Messiah. And that would happen prior to Jesus' ministry and confirmed at the baptism of Jesus. But John obviously ministers for years before as well. And it's a very important figure of his own right. And this happens exactly 483 years after Ezra sets this timing. Okay, so following along chapter 9, we get to the end of the prophecy of Daniel. And before the end comes, the Messiah is put to death. So this is an interesting revelation, right? So we would not expect that naturally in the flow of all this narrative, right? So this is the rock that will conquer all the kingdoms, right? This is the um, Son of Man that descends from heaven. But what Daniel's revelation indicates is this same Messiah will be put to death, and then Saint Daniel says that he will have nothing. In chapter 9, verse 26, he dies without a physical kingdom. This is again emphasizing that this is not something of human efforts involving human beings. This is something divine and not physical. It is spiritual. So he dies without the kingdom. And then Daniel says that the king, this final king, the Vespasian, of course, as we've seen before, he comes in and he will destroy the city and the temple. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. That's a 7 year contract, a 7 year agreement that takes place. And this is a conflict that is taking place, right? This is a continuous war, as the verse is saying. During this 7 year conflict, in the middle, he puts an end to sacrifice and offering, and the temple will be set up as an abomination that causes desolation until the end is decreed and poured out on him. So Vespasian, within this 7 year conflict, is supposed to violate and destroy the temple. So we can bring it together now that we have all the pieces from the book of Daniel. So Ezra carries the decree and completes the temple in 458 BC, consecrating the Israelites. There is a 490-year prediction of the coming of the Messiah, which is fulfilled in Jesus in the year 32 AD. 43 years to John's Messianic word about the Messiah, somewhere around 25 AD. And then you get this 7 year war that is exactly 7 years, from 66 to 73 AD. And dead in the middle of that, just like Daniel 9 says, the temple is destroyed in 70 AD. This, of course, ends sacrifices, just like Daniel says. There is an abomination that takes place when the Roman soldiers enter the temple with their pagan symbols and make sacrifices to their pagan gods in the temple. This is deliberately done because the rebellion that Daniel says will happen was actually being led in the temple itself. The temple was a huge complex, and that's where the rebels had been hiding. And so this is something that Romans do on purpose to prevent this from happening again. And they completely destroy the temple. There's a story about how the temple is destroyed. That originally, there wasn't a desire to destroy this extremely beautiful temple, but accidentally a fire is set out, and because the gold of the temple that Ezra had brought and added onto the temple, the gold, of course, starts to melt, and it melts into the rocks of the temple, into the foundation of the temple itself. And so the Romans, after the temple burns down, they go in and overturn every single stone and to remove the gold from the temple. So every single stone is overturned, just as Jesus will predict in the Gospels. So this happens in 70 AD. But there's also another component to Daniel's prophecy, which is that there will be persecution for a time, times, and half a time, which is 250, 350 years, right? 100, 200 plus 50. And that 350-year persecution actually is fulfilled with the Roman persecutions of the church that go on throughout this time period, all the way until the Roman Empire gives the church its own power, not the political power, but it gives the church the spiritual power, the spiritual authority, by declaring Christianity the official religion of the entire kingdom. This happens under Emperor Theodosius in 380 AD, which is exactly, I mean, if you start counting at 30 AD for the crucifixion instead of 32 AD, that is precisely exactly 350 years. So we have the 490 years precisely predicted, as well as 350 years of persecution precisely predicted. This brings the entire prophecy of Daniel. The destruction of the kingdoms takes place once the whole territory becomes under the influence of the Christian church, because the Christian church will not allow wars and expansion and things like that to be the default of what the Roman Empire should do. So this is kind of the height of spirituality for the Christian church, and so it has a very pacifistic mindset that will go on until the Crusades. It will not propagate war; it will only be defensively fighting. So this is the whole history of the prophecies of Daniel, and I want you to see. I hope that you see that the precision is there. So these are not prophecies that are just generally uh, fulfilled. The fulfillment is extraordinarily precise by the year, by the specific Caesar that arises in the manner that he arises, right? The post and the other three, in the manner that this particular Caesar will offend the temple itself, change its laws so that sacrifices can no longer be used. The feasts are no longer centered around the temple. So everything changes because of the actions of this particular Caesar. And so I can't even think of a single thing that is lost in this entire fulfillment of the prophecy. So I hope that you see why Christians say that Jesus is the fulfillment of this prophecy, because everything is centered around this crucifixion date. So hope this was helpful. Shalom.